Recording?
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. So, you are in Intro to Views, creating dynamic lists of content. Very exciting. So, my name is Jake Ineichen. I'm going to be your presenter today. And we have a lot to cover. We're just going to be going kind of high-level introduction to everything, so you're not going to get really detailed on anything, but you'll get to see some of the capabilities that views can do. So I'm going to have to talk fast so that we can get to contextual filters, which are really exciting. Those are at the end of the session. So we're going to start just a little bit. As I said, my name is Jake. I'm the Digital Services Librarian at Madison Public Library in Madison, Wisconsin. And Digital Services Librarian, what does that mean? I'm the web developer for the library. And in Drupal terms, I'm the site builder. I don't do a lot of coding myself. I do a lot of configuring, theme building. So I've been doing that for 4 years. And so I build Drupal websites for our staff, for our users. I oversee daily web services. There's a broken link on the website. I fix it. And train other users to actually add content, create documentation for them, and troubleshoot issues. So today, I'm going to introduce you to views. I'm going to give you some of the terminology. We're going to go over and look at what each part of the interface of the Drupal, the views UI looks like. We're going to create a few views of various configurations, and then look at a couple modules that extend views and can make for some really dynamic, expansive, interesting displays. So we're going to start. So I want to know, gauge who's in the audience. So who here is learning Drupal for the first time, or is like a really new user to Drupal? Okay, great. Who here has used Drupal for a little bit, but hasn't used views a bunch? A couple? Okay. Anyone say they're more experienced, really experienced at views, and is just waiting to fix my mistakes? Couple? Okay, I hope all of you get what you want out of the session. So we're going to start. Just what is views? And because views is a confusing term in Drupal, because we use it everywhere. It's also a word that you use pretty commonly. So you might hear someone, no one would say this, but you could say, after I installed views, I used views to create a bunch of new views. And those are all accurate descriptions, like uses of the term views. So we can talk about views as a module. So it's in core in Drupal 8, which is great. It's a contrib module in Drupal 7 and below. And everyone used it in Drupal 7, so it's great that it's in core. It is also kind of described as the tool that we use to create dynamic lists. You can think of it as kind of the user interface of views. I used views. And when we're talking about dynamic lists, that means the content changes based on what content you have, adding new content, new filters that you add. And we also use the term views to describe the list itself. So the list of things, which could be content or users or taxonomy terms, blocks, almost any sort of entity. I'm going to use that term entity throughout the talk to talk about kind of a contained, self-contained item, which could be a piece of content, a user, etc. And I like to say that it's not just a list of things, because when someone says you can make lists, I get a very specific picture of what that means. Like, I get 3 dots, and then that's my list. But with views, you can create a series of things. So any number of things in some sort of order. So these are all examples of views. So over in the top left, we've got a list of content, most recent content. We've got a list of users. In the middle, we've got an RSS feed of content. That is also created with a view. And we've got a slideshow of content, which is also a view, just a series of images that scroll through. So, as I said, Drupal views is in core in Drupal 8, which is great. And the people who worked on core decided to do something that I think really makes sense. Was now that views is in core, we should just build all of the admin interfaces with views. And so that means that they're all available for you to edit, which is really powerful and very dangerous. And so using views is like just living on the edge a little bit. And so this is the default admin content view that you see when you go to just admin/content. But we're going to go over kind of what each of the pieces of this, which you can't actually read because it's too small. We're going to go with the pieces of this, and I'm going to talk about what each section of this interface does. And then we'll go in later and actually build some views. So, at the top of our view, on the top left, we have a list of the displays of the view. Now, this is the second confusing thing about views, is that a view is kind of a series of content, as I said, but you can have multiple displays of that series of content to allow them to be created and built in different ways. And so there are a number of types of displays. So there's a page, which has a URL. You can go to it. Blocks, which you can add throughout your site on different pieces, in different regions of your site. Feeds, like I said, an RSS feed. There's so much more. You can make entity reference views, which allow you to enhance the the content creation forms by getting more specific instead of just having a giant list of everything in a specific field. So that's up in the top left, are the lists of the displays that you have. Oh, and a really good example of why you might have multiple displays on a single view is you can think of like having a standard blog. The front page of the blog is a list of the recent posts that you've had, kind of in reverse order. It's a teaser to the full post. But you might also want to have the RSS feed for your blog. So but it uses the same configurations as or much of the same configurations as your page. So you would want to use it in the same view. So if you change anything, it changes across all of the displays instead of just the one. You might also want to have a block of just the 5 most recent posts and like just the titles, and put those on in a block in the sidebar when you're looking at a full post. And you can use all of those in the same view. Now this is great because it's very powerful because you can change things across many different spots with just changing one configuration. Also, again, very dangerous because you can and will want to make specific changes to individual displays. And you have to be careful not to make changes to the whole view. But so at the top left, it lists all of the available displays that you have. The admin content default view just has one page. In the top right, the very top, is the view actions. So you can edit it, change the title, delete it, dangerous, duplicate it, great. So below that is the current display settings. So the current display is the page that we're on, and that has all of the options that we're going to talk about I'm going to go into after this. But it has title, format, fields, filters, sort options, a whole bunch. And then the very top right is the display actions. So above that, you can delete the whole view. In this one, you can just delete the display, and you can keep the view in itself. Or make duplicates, and actually a link to view the display as well. Below that is a running preview of what your changes in the view are doing. And so you kind of it's not meant to be literal, but it does allow you to see what your changes are, or what effect they're having. So in the display configuration, we've got the display name, and by default, it just goes to the type of display it is. So this is a page, so the display name defaults to page. And you can generally leave that alone unless you add another page, because then the next one's just going to be page 2, and you're going to want to change that so you can identify them in the display list at the top. Below that is the title of the view, or the title of the display. So this could be the page title, the block title, the feed title, depends on what display you are currently editing. Below that is the format. Now this is another term that we're going to use when we're talking about views, is a view, as I said, is made up of a series of things. Each of those things, views calls a row. And so the format, you can choose how those rows are displayed. So by default in core, you get 4 types to choose from. You get the grid, which is pretty self-explanatory. You get to choose how many columns, and it looks like a grid. HTML list, which actually wraps your entire view in a list element, and then each row is its own list item, so an li tag. Below that is a table, which each row is a row, and each field that you have is a column. That's what the default admin content view is, a table. And below that is unformatted list, which just wraps each row in a div tag. And that is the most customizable. I do most of my work with unformatted lists because then I can theme it however I want, because it's just a div. Now, below that, there's nothing here for the table view, but for most formats, there's also a show setting, which allows you to select the row style. And let's jump ahead. So, and you can just select from 3 options. So content, fields, or search results. And now content allows you to display kind of the entity itself. So if you have and using one of its, I don't know, another confusing term, one of its display view modes. That's the term that they chose to use, even though views is a thing. And when we're thinking about that, showing content, that's like showing the teaser format, or the teaser mode, or the full content mode, or the any custom mode that you add to your settings. The other option is fields, which allows you to select individual pieces of your entity and display them in whatever order you want, and not in any preset mode. Search results is also an option, but I've never used it, and when I looked in the issue queue to try and figure out what it's for, it seems to be broken. So maybe don't use that. There are other ways to make search results, so I'm not really sure what that's for. So below that, if your display, or if your row style or format allows for fields, they'll show up there. If you don't, if you're using the content display row setting, you'll get just this little note that says the current row format doesn't support fields. So great. But that, whereas you can select and choose what actually shows up in the view. Below that is the filter criteria. So you define which content is actually included in the view. Because by default, a view is just grabbing a base entity, whether that's content or users or blocks or search results. And it allows you to filter it kind of in almost infinite different ways to filter to get a very specific grouping of content in your view. You can also expose each filter to make it interactive for your users and for your staff. Below that is the sort criteria, define what order they show up in. You can expose these as well to make it interactive. One thing to note is that the table format also has other sort options, which allow you to click on the label field, or the column label, and then it'll sort that way. So the table has other sort options other than what's available right here. The middle section of the view is the display specific settings. And so this is contextual based on the display you've chosen. So a page and a block are different things, so they have different settings. A lot of the same, but some different. So for a page, you have a path, for example, because it has a URL. A block doesn't have a URL, so you don't have the path setting. You can also add a menu item right here from the view. Now, of course, you could go back in later and edit your menu and add a link to the view with the specific URL, but you can create the menu item right here. Below that is access permissions. You can define who can actually see this view. The default is just to anybody who has the permission view published content, but you can change that to other specific permissions, or it can be role-based. Below that are header and footer, pretty self-explanatory. You can add stuff to the top of the view, add stuff to the bottom of the view. In Drupal 8, the no results behavior are also here. In Drupal 7, they're over here in the advanced column. But so the no results behavior, again, pretty self-explanatory. What happens when there's no content? Does the view just not display? Does it show a note that says, like, there's no content right now, add some? And then below that is the pager. And so the pager actually defines how many items are in your view. And that also allows you to add and define what happens when there's more than that. So like you can have a pager and just show 10 pieces of content, but if there's 11, what happens? Do you add a more link to a different page that lists everything? Do you have a mini pager, a full pager? Okay. Now, over here in the advanced settings, which is collapsed by default, I think because they thought it was scary, maybe? There are a whole bunch of things. We're not going to talk about everything, but I'm going to go over each of those, or most of those. So there's at the top is the contextual filters, which allow you to filter the view based on the context of where it is, or variables that you're passing to it. We'll see an example of what that is at the end of the session. Below that are relationships, which allow you to grab fields from other entities that are related to the content that you're looking at. A really good example of this is relating content to the author that created it, so that you can grab additional fields about the author. We'll look at an example of that later on as well. Below that is the exposed form, so we can change how that exposed filter or exposed sort options appear and display and their actions. There's also things like the machine name. So for this display, has its own ID. You can just select whether it uses Ajax or not. So whether when you change a filter or click next on the pager, does it reload the entire page, or does it just reload that part of the page with the content in it? Aggregation, which allows you to do a little bit of math sometimes. Allows you to squish content together and then count them. It also allows you to do sometimes can allow you to remove duplicates. Sometimes. Below that, there's also like caching options, query setting options that are more kind of advanced. And then a field for CSS classes where you can add a class to just this view. You can also add classes to each of the rows, to individual fields. It's great for theming. All right. So let's build some views. Okay. On my demo site that I'm going to show you now, it's got a now outdated version of Drupal. I installed just 2 contributed modules. So admin toolbar, so I have a dropdown, and views slideshow, along with its submodule views slideshow cycle, and I've installed the required jQuery libraries. So if you don't have the jQuery libraries, it's just an image. And I've done just a couple changes to the site content itself, or the content types. So I added a field to the user entity. I added a new content type of location. I added a entity reference field to the article content type that links to my new location and content type. And I filled the site with some article content from my library's website, just so that we have something to play with. Okay. So let's go ahead and open up my site. So as we can see, it's just got the default homepage on the front. And this is actually a view, so we could edit this if we wanted to. But we want to show you the whole process, so we're going to create it from scratch. So we would go up into structure, and as I said, I've installed admin toolbar, so I have that drop down. Otherwise, you just click on structure, and then click on views. Okay, and we can see a list of all of the views that are on the site. And so many of these are the admin interfaces, which, again, we can edit. It's great. But if you're going to edit it, I would highly recommend duplicating it first, so that you can test your changes without breaking something important. So we're going to go ahead and click Add a View. And after clicking this, it brings us to this kind of wizard to help us build the view without having to go into all of the settings. So we're going to give it a view name. I like to use this naming convention. So it is content, and I want to just show articles. Give it a description. all article content, and then our view settings. So we want to show
What would be an alternate name that you would use besides content, like images or something?
like users or blocks, just kind of differentiating what the base entity of the content is, or of the view is. Sorry. And so that's what I'm selecting right here. So I want this to be content, and I want it to be of type article, and I don't want to add a tag yet. And we want it to be sorted with newest first. And so this is going to fill in a bunch of the fields in our interface without us having to go through each one. Below that, we can kind of quick create a page or a block. I'm going to go ahead and open up the page settings. We get the page title. I'm going to call it articles. We get the path. We're just going to use that as articles as well. We get the format to choose what we want it to actually show as. So we get the for default that I said, and I said I installed the slideshow. So that's also an option. Let's go ahead and make this a grid. And it gives us a couple row style choices to have from. So it could be teasers, full posts, files, fields, linked titles. We're going to go with the teasers. Oh, there we go. And I'm going to change this to 6 because I have 8 pieces of content, so I want you to show you what the pager looks like. Use a pager. We can add a menu item right here. So add it to the main navigation. I'm going to call it articles. And we're going to click save and edit. All right. And poof, we've got a view. As we said, kind of here are the page displays. That options, we just have a page right now. It gave us the title that we chose. It's a grid in teaser format. It is the filter criteria. It defaults to published content. Since we chose article, it adds this content type filter, sorted by newest first. The path is articles. The menu item that we added is right here, and it uses a mini pager. And if we scroll down, we've got our kind of grid format, and this is what the pager looks like. If you wanted to change that to a full pager, I would just click right there and change it to a full pager. And we got a bunch of settings. We'll just kind of skip through those. If I scroll down, we now have all of the page listings as well, instead of just the next and previous buttons. Did you have a question?
Yes. Is there a way to change the format after you?
Yes, we'll do that. Yeah. The one thing that I do want to do is I'm going to change the columns. Since I have 6 pieces of content, it makes sense to have 3 columns. So we're going to do that. There are a bunch of settings in here that are just for the grid format. So a number of columns, automatic width, alignment, and classes. I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And now when I scroll down, I just have 3 instead. So I'm going to go ahead and click save. And we'll take a look at what this view looks like on a page.
Now, your gutters between the items is really tight. Is that handled through the grid, or is that a CSS thing?
That you would handle it through CSS. Yes. So that's what I was going to say. Is we've got our view, like we can see everything. It looks kind of terrible because the teaser format is not great by default in the grid format. But we've got our view, we've got our pager. Up at the top, we now have a new menu item in the main navigation, which is cool. But as you said, this looks kind of bad. So let's go back and change the format to Unformatted List instead, because that makes the pager looks, or the teaser looks a little better in that format. So to change the format, we just click on the format that we have right now, and I can choose from any of these options and click apply. Now it brings us to the unformatted list options, which is basically just add a class. And we're going to click apply. And now it looks like this instead of our grid. We'll go ahead and click save. We'll reload this page. And now it looks almost exactly like the home page of the site. And looks a lot better. But let's say that we really liked that grid format. This is, like I said, the teaser format doesn't look very good in that grid format, but we can separate it out and just use the fields style instead. So we're going to go back and edit this. We're going to change the format back to grid. Set it to 3. and we're going to change the show row style from content to fields. And then there are a couple row style options, but we're going to go ahead and click apply. And now when I scroll down, we've got just the titles, because that's what it defaults when you switch from content to fields. It just adds in the title. But so what things we might want? We might want the image, we might want a teaser of the body, or a trimmed version of the body, and the tags. So let's go ahead and add that in. And when I click on add fields, we get this modal window. Everything in views is in a modal window, usually. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can add to this. So you can filter by category, but even when we select content, there's still a ton of stuff. So we're going to use the search bar. So we're going to look for the image, select it. We're going to look for the body, if I can spell body. And we're going to add the tags. And we can see it started this little list of things we're about to add. Sure.
How do you know which tags to select?
So this first one is the actual tags. This one is the delta, the order of the tags. So that's like you would get, it's a little confusing, but it would be like, it's like the ID of the array for that tag. So if you have 3 tags on it, the delta for the third tag is going to be 2. So it's a little weird. I've almost never used the delta in the fields section. We're going to go ahead and click add, and then it brings us to the settings for each of the fields that we've just chosen. Now, notice I selected image first, but it's giving me the body first because it's in alphabetical order, even not in the order that I chose. But for all of the fields we're about to add, we can add a bunch of things. So we can add a label to it. We can choose to exclude it from the display, which would be useful for, as this says here, grouping fields or using as tokens in other fields. We can combine fields together, which is pretty cool. Click sorting for a table. It's on table format, so we don't have to worry about that. We've got the formatter, and this is based on the field type it is. So body is a long text, so we've got the formatter of default, summary or trimmed, or trimmed. We're going to leave it at default. There are also a bunch of collapsed groupings of settings. There's the style settings, which allows us to customize the HTML of the field, wrap it in a new element. So like I could wrap the body in a details or a block quote element instead of its default based on the template it's using. We can also add a class to just this field, but it would show up on every row in our view, so we can style it. Very cool. So we got the style settings, this rewrite results, which allows us to override the actual output of the field and make it kind of whatever we want. This is where we would use tokens, like we can add and combine fields that were before it in the field. We can also make the whole field into a link, which is not great for the body, but can be really useful for images that don't have links, or making links for specific items. Trim the field, you can also do it in the rewrite. I like to do this here because this has more options. So we're going to say 250 characters, trim only on a word boundary, add an ellipsis at the end. We can add a read more link if we want. And this is the really important one. Field can contain HTML. If we just use this trimmed format up here, sometimes the view, the layout breaks because it doesn't properly close a tag if you have rich text. So by selecting this, it'll properly close the tags after it trims the number of characters. We can strip HTML tags, remove white space, convert new lines to break tags. There's also this no results behavior, which similar to the no results behavior for the display, we can set it to hide if there's no content in it, or to show a little note if we want to do that instead. Also great about this, we can count the number 0 as empty. So why is that useful? For Boolean fields, when it's not selected, in the database, it's listed as 0. It's not an empty field. But we can tell it that 0 is empty so that when we have a Boolean field, it doesn't display, and then when it is selected, it does display. And hide empty, hide rewriting if empty. So we can change that off. So we could turn that off and have it rewrite no matter what, even if there's no content in there. This administrative title just allows you to change the title in the interface, and that's useful because you can add the field multiple times, and you could use different formatters, and labeling them is very useful. We're going to go ahead and apply and add the continue. So move on to the image one. It's got a bunch of the same options, except it's got a different formatter option because it's an image instead of a body or a long text. The one thing that we're going to change is we're going to change the image style to large, just so that it doesn't bring us the whole image. It's going to be in a grid format, so they're going to be smaller, so they don't need to be huge. And we're going to link the image to the content that the image is part of. So if you click on the image, it goes to the article. Great. We're going to leave everything else at default. And now we've got the tags, which that formatter, since a tag is an entity, taxonomy term, we can just have the label, which is just the tag itself with a link to it. Or we can render the entity itself and use one of its display view modes. Again, confusing, but can be really useful.
What does that mean?
The
Render an entity and use its display view.
yes. So in your content types, so like you have content types, you also have display modes for each of those. So like the base view modes for content is like the full content, the teaser. Oh, I made this address one. RSS for like users. There's compact, user account, and so we can actually display the entire entity in the view instead of just displaying its label. Here we go. This one also has this multiple field settings, and that's because you can add multiple tags to an article. And so you need to tell the view what to do with those multiple tags. By default, it has display them all in the same row, so we can uncheck this and have an article with 3 tags show up 3 times, each one with a different tag. But by default, it combines them together, and then it asks us what to do. So we can have just a list of the tags, or we can separate them with a separator. And so this is just a comma and a space. So when I click apply and scroll down, we've got my title that's already there, the trimmed body, the image, and my tags separated by commas, which is cool. The one thing that I'm going to do is...
That image is the 480 by 480 or whatever it was?
Yes. So this is 480 by 480, and then shrink down a little bit because it only fits in the 3 column. But what we're going to do is just a couple things that I want to do before we take a look at it on the site. We're going to change the field HTML of the title to wrap it in an H2 tag. So I'm going to click apply, and we scroll down. Now they're much bigger, much better for accessibility, because we now have H2 tags for each of them. And I'm going to change the order. So we can add new fields. We can also change the order by clicking on the Actions menu and clicking Rearrange. So I'm going to put the image at the top, and that's all I'm going to change. Click Apply. Go ahead and click Save. I'm going to reload this page, and now we've got this unformatted list. Now, again, as you said, there's like spacing issues. So what we can do is add a class to this view and to use some pre-made CSS that I added to the theme. So we open up Advanced and add a CSS class. Example fluid grid for my class name. Notice it doesn't actually change anything in the admin theme because I only added the theme rules to the site theme. Go ahead and click Save. And reload the page. Oh, it's in a grid. All right. So I wanted to change this to unformatted list so that I can theme it the way that I want it to. Didn't do that. All right. We'll go ahead and click Save. Now you've got this kind of a lot nicer looking card layout. Again, it's still not perfect, but it looks a lot better than the teaser format that we looked at earlier. Yes.
Does core come with any identified utility classes that will do this?
I mean, I don't know of any.
Okay.
Someone else might be able to answer that better, but
Because there's like a bootstrap thing, you could like just put whatever
Yeah.
grid class is on there.
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
write your own.
yeah, I write my own, so I don't know of any that's built into core. Okay, let's catch up with my notes. Okay, so we've got this view, we've got it a little nicer looking, but let's say that we actually don't want to show all of the articles on the site. We just want to show articles that have this tag reading. We're in a library, so those are the tags we have. So I'm going to go into the view, and the only thing we have to do is add a new filter. So in the filter criteria, we're going to go ahead and click add. Again, we get this giant list. So I'm just going to search for tags, add the first one, not the delta. We're going to add and configure, and then I'm going to get the option how we're going to select it. We can either have a drop-down or an autocomplete field. I like to use the drop-down just so I can see it. Click apply, and then now we get a bunch of operator options. So we can choose it to filter for multiple tags, to be one of multiple tags. It has to be all of them. We can have it selected so that things that have or that don't have tags, we can just filter for those. We can filter for things that just have tags. There's just, the sky's the limit. But we're going to do is one of, and scroll down and select reading. Now notice we also have this expose option, which would allow it to make it interactive. We'll take a look at that in an exam in a little bit. But if I click apply, and I scroll down, there are now just 3 items that have my reading tag. And now we can do that. We could filter for just about anything. This is really powerful. But we're going to go ahead and change the settings for this and expose it so that I can actually click. We can let our users select what content they want to see. So go ahead and change the label. And we're going to leave everything else at default. When I have it exposed, the default will, I can select it to have a default setting instead of just show everything. Go ahead and click apply. Click save. And then when I reload the page, yeah, okay. So now we've got this tags dropdown that I can select. And so it's filtering right now to just the reading articles. I can filter it to just the history articles. And it reloads the whole page and shows them. Filter to just the events. And now we have a whole bunch.
Now, how is it switching between 3 and 2 columns? Is that your CSS doing that?
Yes. Yeah. So this is with my unformatted list. This is a flex box. And so when there's 2, it fills in the whole. I've allowed it to fill in the whole screen. And when there's 3, it shrinks down. Yeah. And when there's 1, I think there's 1 equity event in these 8, fills up the whole thing. And that's just the Flexbox CSS that I chose.
There's not like an admin UI way to change that CSS that you'll want to go into the code base and actually make your changes into your theme.
Right.
This.
Right. Yes.
Can you
Yes.
repeat that for the recording?
Yes. So the question was, in order to change those kind of CSS settings, you would actually change those in the theme, not in the view right here. And that's out of scope of this talk. Okay. So we've got that. We've exposed it. Okay. So we've created a view with an exposed filter. Now what I want to go into is adding a relationship to this view. So let's say that we wanted to add we wanted to add information about the author of the article to the view. So what I could do is like look in the fields and look for stuff about the author. So if I type in author, spell it right, there are only a few options, and the only one that really counts is this authored by, which actually just gives us the username or the user ID of the author, which isn't helpful to people looking at the site. So what we can do is add a relationship over in the advanced settings. So click add a relationship, and I'm going to type in author. And so we can select content author, and this allows us to relate this content to the user that created it. Now when I click add and configure relationships, And we can change what to call it and require it if we want. We're going to go ahead and click apply. And now nothing actually changes in the view yet when I scroll down. But if I add a new field, there's now a new category in here called user, because I've added a relationship to the user that created the content. And now I have a whole bunch of new fields about the user. And the one that I want is this display name. That's the custom field that I said I added to the user entity. And this is just a plain text field. So I'm going to add and configure. And up at the top, since I have relationships, we can now select to use a relationship. Since this is a user field, it defaults to the author relationship. Go ahead and click apply. And then now when I scroll down, it has this display name instead of a confusing user name or username. Sorry. And so we've got me, we've got Harry. You can hear with the next one, and then back to me again. And so I could rearrange this. We'll put the author right below the title. Click apply and save. Let's go ahead and move it to events so there's more stuff. And then now we've got a much more nice looking information about the user that created this content. So,
Was that name that you selected underneath the user category?
so this was a custom field that I added to the user entity called display name. Yeah. But we can add we can grab all information about the user, so their email address, the when they were created, if they're currently logged on, a whole bunch of different stuff. Okay, now that's relating just to the user that created this content, but relationships can actually go so much farther than that. We can actually add, since this is an article, and I said that I added an entity reference field to the article content type that links to the location content type that I created. So the example of this would be that I have articles, I have library locations, I have articles that might be about a library location, so I could link them together. And so I can add a relationship to this view of articles, and then I'm going to type in location because that's the field name, and we can link it kind of both ways. So we can either link it to the content referenced from the field or the content using the field. We want to link to the content that's referenced from it. So the article is referencing locations. We want to link to them. So I'm going to go click Add and Configure and Apply. And then now what I can do is I can add fields about the location that is referenced from the article itself. So I'm going to put in the address field that I added to the location. Again, a custom field on the custom content type. Go ahead and click Add. And I'm going to use the relationship to grab the address field from this content. And click Apply. And now when I scroll down, the first item doesn't actually have a location, so it doesn't have an address. But the second one happens at Central Library, so it's now pulling in the address from the location content type, or the location content piece of content. Scrolling a little farther, Women's History Month. There's an event at I think that's Ashman Library. Now, here's the problem with relationships. We've got duplicates, and that is because this article is linked to 3 different locations. And Views interprets that as 3 different rows of distinct pieces of content, which it kind of is, in a way. Now, there are a bunch of ways, or there are several ways that we can attempt to kind of remove these. As I said, there's the aggregation setting, which works sometimes, but can be a little confusing. It's much better for grouping and then counting rather than collapsing, but can be used. There is a setting in the query settings for distinct, which again works sometimes. It tries to make the entry distinct, but in this case, as we'll see, it's still the same because they're kind of distinct because they have different addresses. There was a great Drupal 7 module called Views Distinct, which allows you to filter on whatever field you want, and then choose what to do with the content that has multiple fields after you're grouping them. I'm still hoping for a Drupal 8 release, but who knows? And so we can also add a filter on the like delta of the location ref reference. And so just choose, the first one that's referenced. But then we're just going to get one thing with one address. Not great, but can be used. So sometimes, and in this case, what I would do instead of adding this relationship is add the location and instead of rendering just the label, which would be the library name, I would render the entity and use that custom view mode of address that I created that just shows, well, right now it shows the title and the address. And I would probably get rid of the title. But if we added this, I'm going to go ahead and remove this other address and remove the relationship so that it won't make the duplicates anymore. And when I scroll down, it's now showing the rendered entity of the location with the library location and the address. That's the custom view mode that I created.
And what does it do with the one just
Oh, yeah.
where there's multiple?
So,
okay, perfect.
It I had selected leave it at simple filter, but each of these is like its own big article element, so it's going to be spaced out. So what I'd probably do is change the multiple settings to like an unordered list, maybe. And then when I scroll down, we've now got this list instead. I would probably theme it a lot differently, but that's one option. So, as I said, relationships are hard, both kinds. And so sometimes the best way is to just not use a relationship and use the new view modes that are in Drupal 8, which is great, or new in core. Okay, so relationships are also great for things that reference one thing, like the author. There's only one author, so you're not going to get duplicates like that. All right, so let's make a slideshow, because that's a little easier before we go into contextual filters. So we're going to add a new block. Well, let's just make a page. So we're going to add a new page, and we can see that it now is called page 2. So I'm going to change that. So change the display name by clicking on it. We're going to call this page slideshow and apply. And all we have to do, really great, is just change the format to slideshow. And notice we now have another display. So now on many of our selections, our settings, we're going to have this option to change it for all of the displays or change it for just this display. And we want to change it for just this display so that we still have the old article page, but we have a new one with the slideshow. So I'm going to go ahead and apply. And we have a couple options for the slideshow format. The submodule, the view slideshow cycle, is the only type that I have installed. If you had more types, you'd have a longer dropdown with different settings. You can add a widget and a pager or controls for the slideshow. We're going to leave that at default for now. Just click apply. Some things we'll need to do. We could change the title. So articles slideshow. And again, just this page. Change the path. So articles /slideshow. Let's go ahead and add another menu item. So normal slideshow, main navigation. And then now when I scroll down, this will start cycling through the content. And it looks a little weird with like all the fields that we had before. So let's get rid of everything except for the image. So go back up in the fields, click rearrange. We're going to get rid of the title, get rid of the username, get rid of the tags, the location, the body. And just for this page, see again, dangerous. I could have changed everything. Click apply. And now when I scroll down, it's just the image. Now, the other thing that we want to do is we might want to add a pager. And this can be a little confusing at first because Pager for a slideshow, what I'm talking about is like it adds a small piece of the content that we can then select to like bring up in the slideshow. So what we want to do is add another image field that can be formatted differently because we don't want it to be the big one. We want it to be much smaller. So I'm going to add the image field again. And the only thing that I'm going to do is change the image style. Instead of the large one we had selected, I'm going to make it the thumbnail. And I'm also going to change the administrative title so that it's different from the other image. So Pager image. Click apply. And now it shows up here. We actually want it to not display in the fields right now. This is a confusing thing. But we can exclude this and then use it in the slideshow settings. So now if we scroll down, it's not there right now. But then when I go into the slideshow settings and scroll all the way to the bottom, we're going to add a Pager widget. And it tells me to select what field I want to make into the widget. And so I want it to be the Pager image. Click apply. And then now when I scroll down, I've got the pager that I can click on to activate and move through the slideshow.
And if you want those
That's pretty cool.
side by side, would that be also CSS?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, I wonder if the slideshow has a theme that works. So now I'm going to reload this page, and we're going to see that there's now a new link up here for slideshow. So I click on it. Let's see. Yeah, so that is a CSS setting that you would have to add. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is how to add a slideshow. Really simple. Just choose slideshow from the format if you've installed everything, and you can build it right there. Okay, so now the last thing that we're going to do that we have time for is to show how a contextual filter works. So what we could do, and what we might want to do for my library's website is have the events that happen at a location on that location's individual page, which would be great. And we know how to do this. We could add a filter criteria for that specific location, and then have a block that just has that and add that to the location page for it. Now we could do that. We could create 4 blocks, or 10, or 30, or 50 if you're Denver Public Library and have 50 branches. But that is a nightmare to create that many blocks. So what we can do is we want to add a contextual filter that says, all right, what page am I on? Use that ID and filter on that, which is really powerful. But so to do that, we're going to go ahead and add a new block. And I'm going to change the title so that it's helpful. We'll change it to this block. I'm going to get rid of all these fields, except for the title, because that'll be the one that's most useful for this like sidebar block of articles, just on this block. And I'm going to add in the authored on date. And that's something that's different in Drupal 8 that I was really confused about at first. Created was what it said in Drupal 7 was the name of the, like, when the article was created. But it's authored on in Drupal 8. So we're going to go ahead and click apply, leave it at the medium format. And then now we've got just this table list. I'm also going to get rid of the tags for just this block, remove, and I'm going to change, I want to change the title. So instead of using an H2, the way that the Bartik theme uses stuff in the sidebar, it uses H2s already, so we want to use it, have a sub heading. And so now we've got our list, and now what we want to do is go over into Advanced, click on Add a Contextual Filter, and what we want to filter on is the library location. So we're in the article. We want to link to the location that it's referencing in its content. So we scroll down, click on Field Location, just this block. Now we're changing a lot of things in here, so we may have actually wanted to create a new view because we're doing a whole bunch of like overriding this specific setting. Now, adding a contextual filter doesn't really do a lot at first because we need to tell the view what to use as the contextual filter. And so really common to do is click this provide default value. And the one that we want is this content ID from URL. So we're telling this view to grab this article, look at the location field, and then look at the ID based on the URL. So look at the path alias and define what content page we're on, and then show only the events that have that location selected. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And now when we scroll down, there's nothing there because we don't have a contextual filter yet. But if I added in the ID for one of my locations, 9 is the node, we've now got just the articles about that current library. If I change it to 10, we get a different list of articles that are just at Ashman. And 11, we just get the ones at Hawthorne Library. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And since this is a block, we now have to add it to our page. And we can just use the normal block structure. So we're going to go ahead and go up here, go into the block layout, and we'll put it over in the first sidebar, because that's what Bartik does. And if we scroll down, we can see the views that I created. We just have this content articles one. So that's the only block that I've created. And we just want it to show up on the location content types. That's great. So when I go ahead and click Save, it's now there. And then I can go to my central page. And over here in the sidebar, it's got that weird grid format still. So I want to get rid of that CSS class for just this block so that it just shows up in that list. And click Save. And reload the page. And now we've got just the articles about this current library over here in the sidebar. And if I change it to Ashman, it just has those two. And this works whether or not you have a path alias or not. So if I go to node 10, which is Hawthorne Library, node 11 is Hawthorne Library, it shows just those articles.
So it's connecting the name of the library with the ID that you keep in the database?
Yeah, so it's using the path that you added to the content to understand what the ID of it is, which is great. So cool. There are a couple other things we can do with the contextual filter, which, if you're not looking at the specific page that you're on, that specific piece of content, but you can grab a raw value from the URL. So if somewhere in the URL you have the ID of a tag, you can grab that from say it's in the third component, you can grab that to filter on, which is pretty cool. But so I really use this content ID. You can also use this user ID. So you can filter for just content that the current user who's logged in can see. So you can use that to, what I've done on our site is added in a table that has all of the content that the currently logged in user has created. So that's on their user homepage when they first log in, so they can see all this stuff and just go back in and edit it right away. Okay, so that is, we're gonna have a lot of time. We got through the contextual filters, yeah. So I've got a couple of things left. A few view modules that extend views and allow you to do really cool things. So we added in the Slideshow. That's a contributed module. There's Views Data Export, which allows you to export content via CSV, I think is the most useful one. So you can just grab all content on your site, export it into a PDF, or a CSV file. There's Views Infinite Scroll, which gives you a Twitter-like interface, where you scroll to the bottom, and then you can have it auto-load the next 10, or have a button to load the next 10, which is pretty cool on the same page. Entity Queue, and Views Data Export is in beta for Drupal 8 right now. The Infinite Scroll is stable. Entity Queue, which allows you to manually select different types of entities, so specific content, to add to a list. And then you can use that entity queue to populate your view. So we use that for our main slideshow on like our home page. Instead of using the like promoted to front page setting in the content, we have an entity queue that we just add whatever we want to it. That's in an alpha version right now. That does have a company sponsor, so I think that will get to a stable version eventually. There are some calendars. The main one in Drupal 7 is just calendar, but that does not have a Drupal 8 release yet. It's in development, kind of-ish. I don't know, not convincing. There are two full calendar views modules that use the full calendar JavaScript library. Full calendar view is stable as of last night at like 11 p.m. And then full calendar is an alpha. But those ones are both like have active development being on them, which is, you know, Drupal modules do the same thing, but yeah. Masonry API, which allows you to use kind of a JavaScript grid that has a release candidate, and that I'll show you an example of what that looks like when we have time. And Isotope, which is a dynamic filtering JavaScript library. And just to really quick, I can show you the Wisconsin Book Festival site, which is one of the sites that I manage. I didn't build it first, but this is what Masonry allows you to do. So like each of these is its own piece of content. And then Isotope allows you to do this. So Masonry has a release candidate. Isotope doesn't have a Drupal 8 version yet. That's also somewhat in development, but has a great Drupal 7 version. Okay, I think we're done. But does anybody have any questions?
So, one comment. I've used Views in 7, trying to learn it, and had trouble. It does so much.
Right.
And once I started getting an 8, but I found, I'm not positive, but there's a book on Views for 7 that had very bad ratings because it came out when 7, the first version of Drupal Views, 7 was changed, so the book was out of whack. But they said get the Drupal, there's a Drupal 8 Views book to get because it was very similar to 7, so I got that book. So I would recommend people who would try to learn more, Mastering Drupal 8 Views. And they go through all those examples, and the one way I had to learn this thing best was to actually take an example, go through and do it. You know, although today I think you've covered a tremendous amount of information in just 1 hour.
And so the question or comment was saying there's a great book called Mastering Drupal 8 Views, if you're interested in learning more about views. There are also a ton of tutorials on YouTube. There are many, actually several MidCamp sessions on views from previous years that I watched to help prepare for this session. So that's one thing that, well, we don't have time for this, but watching Drupal Camp recordings from previous years, great way to learn. All right, I think that's it. So, thanks.